The opening minutes of Port of Call are startling for Bergman fans, with the Swedish director resisting the melodramatic style he'd been fostering with early works and leaning into Italian neorealism. Neorealism emerged in post-war Italy, with filmmakers like Roberto Rossellini and Vittorio De Sica turning their cameras to impoverished Italian streets, rendering the daily routines of the working class in authentic detail. Bergman borrows this style in Port of Call, not only adopting a slightly more documentary aesthetic for rendering Swedish streets, but also immersing himself in the manual labor of protagonists Gösta and Berit, more concerned with their work environment and routine rather than plot in the early minutes of the film. But neorealism is not just about a grittier aesthetic, it's also about social critique. For De Sica, that critique was about poverty in post-war Italy. And for Bergman, that critique is of patriarchy in Sweden. Port of Call follows the relationship between Gösta and Berit, with all of the struggles they face stemming from patriarchal power structures. We quickly learn that Berit was sent to a girls' reformatory school for disobeying her parents, and the threat of being sent back is used by the state and her mother to keep Berit controlled. We later see that the reform school was comparable to a prison, with Berit and her peers physically isolated, disciplined, and forced to barter for basic dignities. This history weighs heavily on Berit, who now struggles with depression and is slow to trust others, lying to her mother to avoid being sent back, and also withholding information from loved ones. Beyond organized power structures, patriarchy also bleeds into social values and attitudes. Berit is frequently slut-shamed in the film, sometimes by local boys, but also by her own mother, who viciously judges Berit for her sexuality. Gösta too begins to engage in such judgments. Bergman stresses that the love between the pair is genuine, but also shows how pervasive patriarchal values are. Berit is hesitant to discuss her sexual history, fearing Gösta will judge and shame her. These fears turn out to be well-founded. Gösta vocalizes a clear anger towards Berit for her sexuality, with his disdain morphing into a deeply insecure self-pity. Despite his deep feelings for Berit, Gösta's insecurities inspires a cruelty that alienates his love, almost for good. In all cases, we see how ubiquitous patriarchal ideology is. Even those who love Berit have internalized misogyny so deeply that it manifests as cruelty and a desire to control her. Now Berit laments this oppression, yearning for greater freedom and struggling to express her own agency as others decide her future without her consent. Bergman highlights the psychological toll this takes, but Berit maintains her staunch opposition to the powers who oppress her. This reaches an apex when Berit helps a friend acquire a back-alley abortion, who shortly after dies from complications. Berit is interrogated, but resists naming the abortionist, maintaining that the state which oppresses women and criminalizes abortion is ultimately guilty for her friend's death. Port of Call demonstrates both the macro and micro consequences of patriarchy, with legal oppressions fundamentally linked to casual misogyny. Bergman's empathy frames such misogyny not only as immoral, but actively harmful, tearing women's personal lives apart and sometimes leading to death. The film's ending is perhaps naively optimistic, with Gösta overcoming his patriarchal conditioning and staying with Berit, despite little build-up actually leading to this decision. Still, there is a power to this. Both characters come together in solidarity, remaining together to resist the patriarchal influence of the state, at least within their private lives. That women's oppression is a systemic issue, that patriarchal values are embedded in both law and social interaction, and that misogyny is an immoral harm, these are not particularly radical arguments, but they are necessary ones, especially considering abortion was still highly criminalized at the time in Sweden. And with reproductive rights currently being rolled back in the United States, maybe Port of Call is as relevant now as ever.